I'll skip over this. We've been working on our first 3 projects, which were on the scale of 30 megawatts, 15 wind turbines each project. Those have now been sold to Origin Energy, and the first one of them is under construction. There's another project which we're calling Gullen Range, which is currently on public exhibition, going through the planning process. And then there is a large project which is called the Silverton Wind Farm, which I just wanted to dwell on for a minute or so. It's located in far western New South Wales. It still will be the largest wind farm in the country when it gets built. The planning application which we're making to the New South Wales government is for 598 wind turbines, with a capacity each turbine of in the range of 2 to 3 megawatts, depending on which machines eventually selected. So that will give the ultimate capacity of the project as over 1,000 megawatts. That would be, in the typical wind year, in a year where we get average wind speeds over the whole year, that would supply about 4.5% of New South Wales electricity consumption. So the figure Mark mentioned of 10% within a decade or so seems entirely feasible to me, and I think 20 to 30% is quite doable in that time frame. That will be energy that's generated without using any fossil fuel, without using any fuel at all. It will be energy that's generated without using any water for cooling. The coal-fired generators in New South Wales use an enormous amount of drinkable water, about 15% of Sydney's consumption, just to evaporate it to cool their generators. So wind is not using any fuel and it's not using any water. Now I will try the unadvisable and just show you a brief visualisation that we made of what the Silverton wind farm would look like. The land is arid. The rainfall out there is about 200 millimetres a year. So this is described as grazing land, but the amount of stock that you can get on this land is very, very low density. And the turbines and access roads, foundations and electrical connections and so on would occupy about 3% of the total land area. So generally that project is seen by the local people and by the government as an excellent higher value use of that land that is otherwise really, it's almost desert, that doesn't interfere with the grazing activities that are currently going on. There are grazing sheep and goats harvested off that land at the moment. And the high growth rate in summer demand means that it's the summer demand that actually sets the requirements for the whole system. And the summer demand being so much faster growing than the overall demand is causing a lot of stress on various bits of the system. And it means there's a lot of investment being made for those few hours a year when everything's really, really hot and the air conditioning's running. This is another excerpt from the same report, which shows that New South Wales summer capacity is going to be about in balance between supply and demand in about 2013. So when you hear the Premier and anybody else talking about new power stations in New South Wales, this is the point they're thinking about. We need to be reasonably certain that we know where the next power stations are coming from in 2013. Otherwise, we are at the point where we don't have as much reserve capacity as we like to have in the system. So why would you have new energy generation projects? As I've just said, the 2 main reasons, the top 5 reasons are probably peak demand. The carbon pollution reduction scheme will also influence what sort of new energy projects are considered, and the renewable energy target also. And the high growth rate in summer demand means that it's the summer demand that actually sets the requirements for the whole system. And the summer demand being so much faster growing than the overall demand is causing a lot of stress on various bits of the system. And it means there's a lot of investment being made for those few hours a year when everything's really, really hot and the air conditioning's running. This is another excerpt from the same report, which shows that New South Wales summer capacity is going to be about in balance between supply and demand in about 2013. So when you hear the Premier and anybody else talking about new power stations in New South Wales, this is the point they're thinking about. We need to be reasonably certain that we know where the next power stations are coming from in 2013. Otherwise, we are at the point where we don't have as much reserve capacity as we like to have in the system. So why would you have new energy generation projects? As I've just said, the 2 main reasons, the top 5 reasons are probably peak demand. The carbon pollution reduction scheme will also influence what sort of new energy projects are considered, and the renewable energy target also. Mark's already covered this, so I won't dwell on it, but in Australia, as is so often the case, we have an abundance of resources in the particular area of renewable energy. Solar is unbelievably good. Germany's famous for having a big domestic solar photovoltaic industry. We have twice to 3 times as much sun as they do falling on each square metre of ground. And conveniently, a lot of our city rooftops are not covered by snow for several months of the year. And although photovoltaics are very efficient, when they're under a metre of snow, they generate absolutely nothing. So the proposed renewable energy target is something you've already heard about. This is the federal government's proposal to see 20% of our electricity being generated by renewables by 2020. That would involve 10 to 12,000 megawatts of wind power. So 10 to 12 projects the size of the Silverton project that I talked about earlier. It seems quite likely at the moment that most of the increase in renewable energy over that period and under this target would come from wind power, given the limitations of the other technologies that I talked about earlier. Most of this capacity will probably be committed, as in site developments will have been done, finance will have been organised, power sales arrangements will have been organised by about 2012. There's enormous enthusiasm and ability in Australia in the renewables sector to get on with this as soon as the government decides what it is it actually wants to do, the point Mark was making earlier. Currently there's a few wind farms in Australia. They're mostly located in the bits of South Australia and Victoria and Tasmania that stick out into the roaring 40s. And my personal theory is that the wind companies in Europe who first decided to look at Australia in the mid to late 90s would have looked on the globe and been aware of the roaring 40s going around the bottom of the planet and thought, bits of Australia sticking out into that, you can't go wrong. Good logic, as it turns out. Wind farm development locations, this is where people like us have been prospecting over the last 5 to 10 years. There's an awful lot in southern Victoria, but interestingly, and this is where we are particularly focused, there's growing interest in the wind resource in New South Wales. The reasons for this are, where are the people? Because the people drive electricity use, and the people are the reason that we have electricity networks, the reason we have existing power stations. The people are in the bottom right-hand corner of South Australia, they are in Victoria, and they're in eastern New South Wales. So it's interesting to see that that's where more development is now happening. So in conclusion, sorry I'm 5 minutes late, we do need new capacity. The energy efficiency and so on that's going on is good stuff, but the indications are that it will only temper demand. It's not going to start reducing demand anytime in the next 5 years. We're already seeing the peak demand growth driving investment in gas-fired generators. And in the short to medium term, the renewable energy target is going to drive investment in wind, which is a perfect complement, and this is just luck, to those gas-fired generators that we are seeing already under construction around the state. And there won't be any additional cost imposed anywhere on the system by the variability of wind within that 2,000 megawatt sort of scale that I talked about. So I think we have a good opportunity that we need to take advantage of, and I think New South Wales itself needs to be proactive in terms of engaging with the transmission system strategy, and as Mark said, making sure that we make the investments that enable solar and wind and geothermal over the next few years that will benefit everybody.